Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. My name is Devin, and this is another episode of the Silver Screen Shenanigans podcast. Today, excuse me. Today we're covering a another special movie that I uh that again came out in 2023, and it I don't know. There's the last three of I'm going to talk about here have come out in 2023. I guess there's just a lot of good movies that came out that year. Um, but this one called Jesus Revolution came out obviously in 2023. Very, I'd say very near to my heart, considering where my faith is, and I mean, it was an overall very successful movie. Um, and it, I think, carried a lot of weight, had a solid message, and I guess before I dive into too many uh big things I wanted to talk about, just kind of cover the box office itself and uh the cast real quick. It was theatrically released in the United States in February. So it received mixed reviews from critics, but I think it was pretty successful. It grossed 54 million on a budget of 15 million, so that's a W. Um, and with a cast starring Joel Courtney, Jonathan Romy, who does portray Jesus in The Chosen, produced by Angel Studios. Kimberly Williams Paisley, Anna Grace Barlow, and Kelsey Grammer. I'll be honest, I'm not as familiar with the other people as I am with Jonathan Romy, but I think they all did a fantastic job. So, with that sort of information out of the way, let us continue on to the plot itself. We pick up this movie in 1968, covering, I believe, California, maybe in the south of California. I think his name is, let's pull up. Chuck Smith is a Southern California pastor. He's a very stern but well respected pastor. You know, very much that it's a very conservative church. Um, but he unfortunately comes to the realization that his church is dying, and what I mean by that is numbers. There are, some old folks still there, but overall there's um not very many in the congregation. This is obviously, a problem. You want to have uh how a church survives is the people. And he is unable to connect with a younger generation. I mean, right? How many of I mean, that's just a timeless classic of the older generation failing to connect with the younger. I mean, that's timeless, right? That from the beginning of time, probably towards the end, that's always going to be true. Like, especially right now in 2023. But what is going on in the 60s and the 70s? I had to do a little digging because I'm not as familiar with that, being born in the 2000s. Um, the younger generation in the 60s and 70s is the hippie generation. Uh, Teens and young adults, kind of living through life, peace and love, harmony, um, doing drugs, all sorts of stuff, just kind of a carefree lifestyle. And this is obviously not driving with the older generation. So Chuck Smith's daughter, Jeanette, is, uh, driving out to one of her escapades. She's very much, one of the hippies, I suppose. She's out, having a fun time. And as she's driving home, she sees this man walking along the dirt road, and he's got a very interesting getup on. He's got like the I think it's the polo. He's got a guitar. He's he's like not shaven. His hair is long and the facial hair is long. And she offers to pick this guy up, like to give this guy a ride. And he's a very colorful hippie. I'd say a little bit older than like a young adult, I suppose. But this is a real life guy. Oh, and if I didn't mention this movie is based off of loosely based off of a true story in the 70s. Um, but this is one of the guys that existed, played by uh, Jonathan Rumi. He plays the real life guy named Lonnie Frisbee, which I that's just a great name. What a hippie name, right? uh, who says he is traveling around telling people about the ministry of Jesus. Chuck Smith, at first is suspicious of Lonnie when he's brought into the home, which it does make for a comedic scene where he's like, "Hey, peace of love, brother," and he goes up and he hugs like Chuck, and he's very conservative family, so it's kind of a fun like juxtaposition of lifestyles. But they eventually kind of all warm up to each other, and they welcome it into the church and their home, to the dismay of uh Chuck and his wife. More hippies soon arrive into the Chuck household. So where there's one, there's more. And after Lonnie introduces to Chuck to a newly formed band called Love Song, the group performs the song in his living room, and Chuck develops a new attitude towards the young people, hearing that their message is truly about Jesus, and just because they look a certain way shouldn't mean a thing. So Chuck and Lonnie end up, kind of in a way joining forces, I suppose, and they start a successful movement to evangelize hippies, youth, everybody. So, kind of, I suppose that's kind of, um, it's weird. It's interesting because, like, I don't know if if that's the subplot, but that's kind of what it starts out with. I think this is sort of the A plot, the kind of the main story is what we cut to now. So, meanwhile, a high school student, Greg Laurie, um, who is sort of a troubled youth, to say the least. We see him first running away from his junior officer training. Um, and he joins a girl named Kathy, I think, and her friends who, quote, turn him on to a variety of different drugs and such like that. And then they go to a Janis Joplin concert, how 60s, right? And at the concert, um, Timothy Leary, I think is the name, if I wrote that down right, is seen preaching the value of LSD for self discovery. Um, However, Greg sees the sort of truth of what's happening, and various hippies are like, I think it would best be summed up as dangerously irresponsible. Um, One night, Kathy, um, like I guess they're all having like a smoke session or whatnot, and Kathy's sister gets dangerously sick from an overdose. Um, and then Kathy gets angry at Greg for not caring about the dangers of what they're getting into, and their friendship sort of breaks for the moment. Um, uh, I believe this is the scene where like Greg runs out into the rain and he's like confused, doesn't know what he's doing, and then Lonnie sort of, probably not by chance, meets him and sort of gives him a pep talk. Um, uh, and So then at a local campus, Greg finds Kathy listening to Lonnie preach. Greg approaches her and they sort of reconcile a little bit, with Kathy telling him she's found a church and she would very much like if he would attend it with her. So Greg is a little hesitant at first because he doesn't know anything about this, which fair enough. And so Greg and Kathy find solace. It's Chuck and Frisbee's church, which I don't know. I just find those two put together just kind of funny. Through Kathy's establishment, and her conservative parents are not enthusiastic about Greg because, he's a dropout, runaway, doing drugs, yada yada. Um, the ministry soon explodes, though, in popularity, being seen as a quote unquote Jesus revolution, which I encourage you to go look out at the Times newspaper article. This is a real thing that happened. With a bunch of young attendees searching for something, searching for truth, searching for meaning, and they get lost in drugs and all other sorts of things. But I believe it's just like today, man. The youth, our generation, are looking for Jesus, and they just get lost along the way. So Christian conversions and a mass group of baptisms in the Pacific Ocean follow as membership Calvary Chapel grows to such proportions that the services have to be held outside, because there are so many people. Under a large tent, Time Magazine, like I said, does a cover story, and this is a real thing that you can find, published in 1971. Both Lonnie and Chuck are featured. Lonnie and his wife, Connie, unfortunately start having difficulties in their marriage. Lonnie believes Chuck is trying to diminish his contributions to their ministry. And this is an unfortunate thing. The inner conflict causes Lonnie to eventually leave for Florida with Connie. Just because of the big disagreements with Chuck. However, before Lonnie leaves, Greg offers to take over the ministry of the Calvary Chapel in Riverside. He eventually works up the courage to reconcile with Kathy. I think there's another moment where he's running in the rain, or maybe he's just really sweaty, and he runs into their house, and her parents are standing there, and she walks out, and it's a courageous moment, I feel like, because one, you kind of have to apologize and pledge yourself to God, and then acknowledge that you want to be with her, all in front of her parents. I think that takes some courage. So they eventually get married, and he becomes the pastor of the church, which becomes Harvest Fellowship. And at the end of the film, the credits reveal Smith and Frisbee reconciled, and both are remembered as founders and leaders of the widespread Jesus movement that started at Calvary Chapel. So yeah, that's just kind of the quick blow by blow of the movie. And I think like every movie I've talked about, I cannot recommend more that you go and see this film. I think it is, I guess I'll get a little preachy here, but it is what it is. That's my background, and that's the topic of this movie. Every generation, I think, this could apply to. And also, like many things in the Bible, the teachings are timeless, and I think this movie has a timeless message as well. To not, just because I suppose somebody would look different, somebody acts different, they are all children of Christ. They're all looking for the truth, and like all of us, we get lost sometimes. And just because we fall doesn't mean we can't get back up. And I think that's what this movie points out precisely. And I think just as it was in the 70s, is it's the same as right now. Our our generation, kind of the younger generation, again, are lost in drugs. We are lost of what it means to be men and women. We are lost um, on so many different things, and it there's so many distractions and there's so much noise. But at the end of the day, this movie, I think, can do a lot of good in pointing us in the right direction, as the right direction has always been, and that's that's JC, man. That's our Lord. And yeah, I find this movie to be like fascinating because I had no idea that this was a real movement that happened in the 70s. Um and yeah, I guess one thing I would like to start doing now is kind of diving into like sort of the response from critics for movies and stuff like that. Um What's also kind of funny though, it was released alongside Cocaine Bear. Couldn't get more different of a movie. Which I watched Cocaine Bear. Like it's really harmless fun. Like it's super silly. Um uh and so this movie, Jesus Revolution, it made 7 million on its first day and 3.3 million from previews, raising the weekend estimates to about 14 million, and it debuted eventually at 15.8 million. And it would eventually go on to earn 50 million in the United States and Canada. So I'd say this movie uh, got a lot of uh, got a lot of eyes on it, which I think is amazing. So critic response here. So the film reviewed, and this is all online. I encourage you to look at this too. Films received mixed reviews from critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, 54% out of 58 critics. Eventually 5.8 out of 10. With quote, Jesus Revolution fumbles an opportunity to bring fascinating real life history vibrantly to life, but deserves credit for avoiding the preachiness common with faith-based films. Which I've heard that quite a bit lately when it comes to uh, messages of faith. What does it mean to be quote unquote preachy? Well, I honestly kind of don't see the point of that, right? Where that's kind of that's kind of the point of the movie is to preach uh the word of our Lord, but it is what it is. Uh Another critic talked about how noted that uh it created buzz, but it failed to like grasp a wide audience, which I don't know. 50 million worldwide, I'd say that it I'd say that reached a lot of people. Another critic talked about how Jesus Revolution takes a fascinating period of American history, a hippie movement and its associated fallout within the Christian community, and transforms into a bland TV movie of the week experience. Which I don't know. I don't know if I found the movie very bland at all. Like, I mean, maybe it's a thing where like the older generation's out of touch. I don't know. Um, but I thought for the generation that it speaks to, it was very invigorating. I don't know. People have their thoughts and have their opinions, I suppose. Um, but I think once again that the message of this movie was fantastic. I think the acting was fantastic. Uh, Production and effects. I mean, that's where I'll admit there's nothing too crazy going on here. Like it's not like a Marvel movie where there's tons of CGI all over the place. Uh However, it I think some of the language behind it like helps the movie push it to having be like more of a classic than I think more people give it credit for. So because of that, I would probably give this movie a 7 or 8 out of 10. Um just because I think the message hits so well. And once again, I highly encourage you to watch it, and also I would highly encourage you to watch some of Jonathan Rome's other productions, such as The Chosen. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a bit of a shorter one today, but I guess maybe because the movie's not as long. But I hope you enjoyed listening, and I want to thank you all for listening, and we will see you again next time.